Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know Dune episode 5 and episode 6, the penultimate and the ultimate episode of Dune Prophecy. My name is Grace, but of course I'm not alone. I'm here with Taran Armstrong. Taran, how you doing?
I'm ready to murder people with my eyes.
It's a lot of murder in these episodes. In this show, there's a lot of murder and death.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
escaping from prison.
A lot of being put into prison, a lot of escaping from prison, a lot of secret labs, a lot of stuff going on in Dune Prophecy.
A lot of robots.
A lot of robots, which are not allowed explicitly, but they're here in Dune Prophecy, a show that has been renewed for another season, Taran. We took a week off. I was with Ariel for episode 4. We skipped episode 5, and we're back for the finale. So it's been a while since I've heard your Dune Prophecy takes, other than hearing them a bit on the Tastemakers. But I'm excited to chat with you about both of these episodes. But yeah, a renewed show, a show that's coming back for season 2, which I think as you watch the last scene of Dune Prophecy, I'm like, oh, yeah, of course. They thought they were going to do more.
Could you imagine if it wasn't renewed? I mean, what an awful ending.
Yeah, not the greatest of endings. Yeah. Certainly I mean, yeah, we'll get into it, Taran.
Let's do it.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I feel like where to begin is overall, the show definitely seemed to. I thought this was going to be a complete story that we got, and it's not. And I feel like it sounds silly to say this, Taryn, when I'm going to say this out loud, but it does seem to be that there's a piece of this that I don't think that I realized about the show, which is kind of in the middle of the show. We do get this thing where there is a prophecy being told to us, being someone born twice, once by blood, once by blood, once by sand is the thing we get. And we're like, oh, that must be the prophecy of the show, Dune Prophecy. This is not the initial name of the show. It's initially going to be called Dune Sisterhood. By the end of the show, I'm like, oh, I get it. The show is going to be about the prophecy that they create, that becomes part of the lore for 10,000 years in the future. And I'm wondering where you like sort of stand on that being the idea of the show. My thinking, you tell me if I'm wrong and I have a total misread of this, Taran, but that they will create the prophecy, the one that like Stilgar is like obsessed with, and the one that the Fremen are obsessed with by the time we get to the Dune movies of what Alib. So is that what you expect we're doing in the show? And I know I'm talking about future things as we're like recapping the episode, but was that your read of the end of season 1 of Dune Prophecy?
No, that's news to me.
Oh, okay, interesting.
The prophecy, as in, and listen, I'm not a Dune head. This is the one that they implanted in the Fremen people, specifically for like the purposes of, I guess, in this case, 10,000 years in the future, that they will be able to basically do what they're doing in this show also, which is like have a person that they control be in charge of the thing.
That's my read of the ending of the show. Was like,
Feels like that.
we're gonna
It
go,
feels
we're
like
gonna go do
take a
the
while.
stuff. Yeah, we got to go do the stuff. We got to start to put the work in for the stuff that's going to happen in 10,000 years. Then we got to do it because it's in the movies. It's such like the Fremen people who are like obsessed with this idea. Well, there's differences at the time of like, yeah, it's probably not true. And Stilgar being like, no, it definitely is true. That ending of the thing was like, better start to get to work on Dune. That's how I read the end of the show.
Like ultimately, that's also kind of their undoing. No, like given the Dune movies.
Yeah, so I think we could talk a little bit about that, as we're not like we've seen 2 of the Dune movies. There's a third one coming, but if maybe they'll never make it. I think Denis Villeneuve will make that movie. But sort of the idea is that there is this prophecy, but at the time in the movie, Paul is not supposed to be Paul. Paul is not supposed to be born a boy, and so he is not supposed to be the person who comes and arrives and is the prophecy. But because Jessica does have him be a boy, he then can fulfill the prophecy and then start to do it. And part of the point of Dune, and I think what you're going to see probably in the future seasons of Dune Prophecy, part of the whole point of Dune is like, don't buy into the white savior thing. Like, don't actually, this is like a bad idea. And actually all of this, like, it doesn't really matter where he's from, even if he like thinks he's, one with the Fremen people, he's probably going to cause a lot of people to die. That's like a prophecy. It's like a vision we see at the end of the second Dune movie. So then the fact that it's like so explicitly. I think the read of this is that like we're going to so explicitly see how the Bene Gesserit will embed the idea of that prophecy into the is both bad for both the Fremen people, but also eventually not in the show. I don't think we won't see this necessarily, but it eventually will be
Well,
bad for them as well.
that's part of the thing for this show for me is that like, what am I rooting for? Like, what is the narrative drive of the show? Like, are they going to ultimately do a thing that they see as success, but I know that it eventually means that they fail, but then the show is ultimately their success story? Or is their success going to mean like going to have like dark undertones of like, you think you succeeded, but actually in 10,000 years? Or am I supposed to root for their failure because they're kind of mean, you know? I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had this exact same thought as I was watching the episode, which is that I do like the show. And there's basically one scene in this episode that I really want to dive into because I think it says a lot about what the show is maybe trying to say. And yet I do feel like I'll tell you, it was basically the Mark Strong scene where he's like, what happens if every moment of your life is you've never actually been able to choose what you want to do? I was like, that to me was really good. I thought that was like the most interesting thing I had seen over the course of 6 episodes of the show. And again, this is a show that I did quite like. I didn't dislike this show, but I do think the show has a little bit of a like, I don't know that I'm rooting for anybody in a way that is a little tough, I think. And, Dune does play with these. I mean, as much as like Paul is a hero, I think specifically in the first movie, he's also not supposed to be like a hero. I don't, and I think you are there. I
Yeah.
think that what works in that situation though is that there is such an obvious like worse force, which are the
Yeah,
Harkonnens.
like I'm
Mhm.
like rooting for Paul, but but I shouldn't be rooting for like I'm getting this this sort of like dichotomy in my brain, which is like, oh yeah, narratively I'm rooting for him, but also this is bad. I'm not getting that in this show. In this show, I'm like, I'm rooting against you, but I guess also sometimes for you, but also against you. But who am I rooting for? Is it the Atreides kid? Maybe he's kind of cool, I guess. But then now he's working with the Harkonnesses. But then, am I rooting for the guy for Desmond? I don't know. He's kind of aloof. All that. Maybe it's the wife. I like the wife, the Empress. She's cool. But I guess she's now against the daughter, and I like the daughter. But and I'm okay with moral ambiguity.
Mhm.
But like, I need to know, like, what are we doing?
So, yeah, I mean, I think what's kind of hard about it is that, like, I think it's okay for us to like acknowledge that, like, we all kind of like not we all. I'm speaking like metaphorically for like maybe just you and I here. Is that like we do kind of like Paul and we're rooting for Paul, and then we can also be okay with the way in which like as the story starts to unfold of like, oh, maybe it's a bad idea that we all love Paul. Like,
Right.
maybe it's a really bad idea,
That's
and that
an
to me is,
effective message to tell an audience is like, you shouldn't be rooting for the person you are rooting for.
I mean, I mean, it's not the exact same, but there's very much the similarities to that of like Walter White. Like there's a point at which he has broke bad in which it's okay to say, "Uh-oh, the guy I liked before is now a bad guy." I think like it's okay to be like, this guy really got screwed over and should probably like it's okay that he wants to just like make money for his family for when he dies of cancer. And then there becomes a point where you're like, I think he's gone too far in this pursuit. That's an okay feeling to have. I think like if like would so the trouble here is that we are introduced to new characters who I think are supposed to be the people we are not rooting for, but the closest to which we are supposed to be rooting for in the same way that we kind of root for Paul is Valya and Tula. I think it's like I don't think there's really a question as to whether or not those are the people that we should, for the most part, be.
Okay,
Uh, and
is
I don't.
that
I guess I don't mean rooting for, but I think maybe the people who are the most. Uh, th- th- they're the most capable characters. So then you're like from a Machiavellian standpoint, I think you're maybe supposed to like be the most intrigued, but it's a huge flaw, Taryn, I think, because I think on the other side you do have like kind of like you do have them up against um the Emperor, who seems pretty ineffective, and we find out most of that's because like
Happy to root
as
against him. He
as the
sucks every
show
time.
as the show ends, you're like, oh, he was, but he was also like complete, like the thing he says of like, none of my choices were my choices. Of like, they literally like made him have a baby that he, otherwise like wouldn't have had, right? And Desmond, who has killed people, sort of the show, who also then I think like maybe doesn't become sympathetic, but there are sympathetic aspects of his backstory, which is that he was like born and his mom and given away. And so I think like I'm also okay with moral ambiguity, but I also I'm with you. I'm vibing with your feeling of like, I don't really know in a scene who I'm supposed to be like, yeah, go get it,
Just,
do it.
yeah, not to jump around too much, but
Oh,
like, there's
you
a
go
scene
for
toward
it.
the end of the finale where the Mother Superior is like mental battling Desmond, and it's like the music is swelling, and we're getting hero shots of her in the mind image of facing off against whatever is happening,
Hmm.
and I this is maybe just me. I felt very strange in that moment because it felt like I was supposed to be rooting for her to win, but I was rooting for Desmond.
Right.
And it felt very strange to me because I was like, I kind of like Desmond more. He kind of
Yeah, but
seems more
I
fun.
I I I think that what you're feeling might be it's one of two things. One, it's like I think that's like very okay for that. Like, and I don't mean to, that feels very patronizing. Be like, it's okay for you to root for Desmond, but I mean that from a like from in that point in the show, they have told us that he actually is potentially a pretty tragic figure, right? Like that he was born of Tula, and Tula gave him away. Valia
I
wanted
think,
him to Valia wanted him to die. She wanted him to not
yeah.
be born, and Tula just secretly gives him away. So like, I think it's okay at that point to be like, I think I'm okay with the person winning who is the person who is the baby who was supposed to be killed. Like I think that is, but then
And I think that's
also,
the thing too,
yeah,
is that like I think part of the reason I wanted him to win was because in my like the things that I care about are I like Tula. I like Tula. I
right,
think she's a more compelling character than Valia,
right,
personally.
right,
And I was really interested in the scene between the two of them and like what was
yes,
gonna happen. And I just felt like Valia was in the way. And so like for her to have this big hero moment where she defeats Desmond, I was like, but you're getting in the way of the thing that I want to see, which is like the Tula Desmond, and we finally get that, and it's like next season.
yeah. I think that there, to a degree, is for my money. I think that this is still. I think this is an interesting story to have told. I actually got pretty excited by the last scene of them arriving on Arrakis and being like, drop the helicopter ramp or the airship ramp down and be like, all right, let's go. Um, but for my money, I feel like there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of what works as the story that they tell us with Paul in Dune, as opposed to the story that's happening here, which is Dune plays into, and I think Frank Herbert was very tapped into something in terms of trying to use our assumptions and our biases and our the way we view the world, and flip them on their head to try to tell us a story. A lot of spice analogy is actually like he apparently Frank Herbert was a big fan of mushrooms, and spice is basically an allegory for using mushrooms. And this is a thing of him showing like actually the power of oppressed people, of like of the Fremen people, and that Paul is not their savior, that actually the Fremen are more would be much better off without Paul coming to save the day. He's going to basically lead them into a religious war. um but the story of Paul is as like this young attractive like boy who's really capable, right? Like he's really good. I don't think that that same story works when you're like this older woman. It's like I don't think the story of like
I,
tricking us into sort of like thinking that there's like she is eventually going to sort of like I think she turns out to be far more evil than we're even given the impression of at the very beginning of the show. And it's I think it's doubly hard when they're both the protagonist of the show, but also they are one of the leading antagonists of the movie film. And so I feel like there's a lot of clouding of the story here that I just think for my money, I think that they honed in and picked the wrong people to follow. Because my thing would be like, I feel like this could be a far more effective story if we viewed it as a complete tragedy of the people who tried but failed in the effort to try and stop this thing from happening. But again, we're centralizing the the worst people in this story, and not the worst people from like the worst actors, but the worst characters who are not we should not be rooting for, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and that's and I don't even think it's like there's absolutely a world where it's the same show, and Valia is my favorite character. I love Machiavellian characters. I think they're very fun to watch, but like they're not, in my mind, placing her in a narrative where I'm supposed to be rooting for her.
Right.
Like her goals are not fun. She's always the fun killer. Like anytime something interesting is happening, she's like shutting it down. It seems. Or like being like, hey, you know that character, you have to kill your little almost daughter girl. Sorry, you have to kill her. It's like, but I like her and Tula likes her. Like, why are you being such a buzzkill? And it's like for no particular reason either. It seems like a dumb idea, and it clearly was. And so like, there's just all kinds of stuff that's happening, and I feel like I'm not supposed to. And then like, then it's like, okay, there's something there about Tula. Like Tula being like, no, I chose to do this. I am also a monster. That's interesting to me because I think that Tula as a monster is a very compelling character. And I'm happy to root for her if she goes against her sister, because she just does what her sister says all the time. And I think that's fun. If they go against each other, that might be fun. But like, but yeah, I think it's just like the way that things are placed just don't quite fit. So for instance, Sister Lila, who is now the person who is murdered by Valya in the opening scene, I was rooting for her. I was like, okay, yeah, turn them against her, expose her secrets. Like, let's go. But like, where is that going? I don't know. Clearly they don't win, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the problem is that like they've cast the biggest and I think best actors on the show as the two leads, the two sisters, as Valia and Tula. This is Emily Watson, Olivia Williams. They're cast here as like the main people in the show. All the marketing material for the show was of them, etc. But I think in terms of this story that they're then trying to tell, I don't think it's a very effective. I also don't know. I also think there is something to like the time that this is coming out, that I think like they're to me, this isn't a very fun story of well, there's a reason why like just success without conflict, and then success in the vein of like, you know like again, I go back to the scene of Mark Strong as Emperor Carino being like, he's like, oh, I just realized I've never had like freedom to do anything I've ever wanted. Everything I've ever wanted to do has been decided by somebody else decided that's what I would do, and so that's what I do for my entire life. To me, I don't think you can then have somebody else in the position who's like the main protagonist of the show, where their mission is to have that level of control. I just don't think that that is as interesting. And so I think you're kind of stuck with trying to do something else, Taran, which is, I think the other thing you could have done is like, if this show is much more from Lila's point of view, basically like actually Dorothea and Raquella and Lila's point of view, that to me, I think makes for such a clearer protagonist of the show. So a far more classic like hero story. The problem is that they like can't win because we know what happens in this world. So we know that like that person can't be successful. But I think you could still give them moral victories of, even if Lila dies at the end of this, or whatever happens at the end of the season, you could still have them know that they actually are right, because we know that like the path that we go down towards in Dune is right. But I think the HBO problem with that is that if you keep doing that, like I imagine next season, there's going to be a bunch of Fremen characters we will meet who are directly opposed to Bene Gesserit like seeding a prophecy into their culture and like embedded their culture. I would hope that those people end up being like the heroes of the season, but they have not introduced until the second season, and potentially are people who have to be like eliminated or killed or whatever in the course of that of trying to like we have to know that they lose that battle. So the show I think likely doesn't want to then depict those people as the main central characters though because they want someone like Olivia Williams who is going to be in the show every season for as long as they renew it. And I think to me that's like my central problem. I find the world building interesting. I found a lot of the story beats interesting. I just think we're like not watching the exact thing that would make the story the most effective. And for me, what I like feel like I'm frustrated by is I actually feel like this could be like an incredible show, and I feel like they're kind of like missing it to it. They're missing the potential of what this show could be. That's
Yeah.
my.
I mean, I think it's largely. I mean, there's many things, but I think it's for me one of the main issues, perhaps, is like just one of motivation for Valia, like her, right, and that's why I hated the flashback episode because it was like right from the start she was just the way she is,
Right.
and it's like nothing. There's no intrinsic motivation beyond just like I want power for our family and I'm slighted by the fact that we don't have it. And then her brother dies and we don't even know how he died still um, properly. And it's like, well, now I need revenge for him. And it's just like, I don't, Tula, I understand. They've given her motivation. She admired Valia and followed her down that path and has done some terrible things. And like I get her character, and maybe it's coming, right? Maybe it's coming. Future seasons will understand Valia more. But like right now, I don't understand her personal motivation, and I don't understand her external motivation either. I don't understand what her goal is. Like, put the daughter on the throne. That makes sense. Beyond that, what is the cataclysm? I don't even know. Like, what is she trying to defend against? I don't know. What is her goal? What prophecy? Make a prophecy? Do a prophecy? Foil a prophecy? I don't know. She's just doing stuff.
Well, I actually think the annoying thing to me there, Taran, is that there's actually within the text of the show, there are a bunch of things you could do to make her motivation make sense. So one and the most selfish version of this, which I still think could be interesting, and you could do this by incorporating better backstory and building her character up more. But the most selfish thing is basically a version of eternal life is to basically to be around for forever because the Bene Gesserit have a way for past generations to communicate with future generations. We basically see Raquella like kind of alive in this episode. She is embodying Lila at moments. So there's a way in which in the most basic, version of like self-preservation was the Bene Gesserit needs to succeed because if you are a mother superior in terms of in the Bene Gesserit, you can then basically have like some version of like immortal life by being present for every single thing that happens afterwards. And the necessity of the Bene Gesserit being like around and continuing to be a thing and fended off by any additional threats would necessitate you trying to make the Bene Gesserit important and invaluable to somebody like the Emperor. So like there's like a very basic like kind of like evil version. The other version they could do, which is like I would be more interested in this version, which is the version where she can have actually like really good intentions and be going about it the completely wrong way. Which actually there's another show I'm watching right now, which is Silo, which is kind of saying that exact thing. There's actually like a very good reason why a lot of the things in Silo are happening, and like the people have to live under like fascist rule in hopes that like people don't do something like these people think that they're smarter than other people, and if they had all the information they would basically kill themselves. And the
What
idea
they're
of
doing
like
in Silo is interesting because just sorry to briefly interrupt,
yeah,
but
no, you
it's
go ahead.
interesting because it is exactly what you're saying, where it's like I'm rooting for a set of characters to do a thing I know is bad for them, but
Right.
like the narrative, the plot is continuing to make me root for them, even though I know what they shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
And that's what I feel is missing in Dune, is that the narrative is not helping me root for this. It's not interesting to me.
Right. Where you could have this thing of like the more that these this group of women who like have powers and abilities to control what's happening and create the most perfect version of the future, the more that they could actually do something that is, you know, quote unquote good, in terms of they could cause less death, they could cause less wars, they could cause, do all of these things to basically preserve like a good version of life for people that is like not actually good, because it's actually the thing that Mark Strongland says as a character, which is like, oh, I actually don't have free will, I actually don't have choice. But the opposite version of that is like, you don't have free will, because if you had free will, you would mess it up, you would make the bad choice. And there's a very easy way for the show to like articulate that as like Valya's driving motivational force. And I feel like they're both like not really doing it. We're just kind of have to like assume why she does that, she just wants like power for the sake of power. And then there's also no driving force from behind her in terms of like what happened to her as a kid that would drive her to do that. Like there's never a moment in her childhood where like somebody shows free will and it like gets them killed or they die or whatever. Like for me, the thing that's annoying about season 1 of the show is that I feel like there's so much opportunity to tell a very interesting and compelling story, and the show just seems like it's not that interested in telling it. It's more excited by like hot Atreides guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think obviously I have a lot of issues with the show in general. I think that's the biggest one though, because like
Right.
if it like all the other stuff, it's minor stuff. Like yeah, the Atreides guy is whatever, and the like the bastard son. What is he even doing? Like, what is his character at all? In season 1, basically nothing, except he happens to be in the right place at the right time to capture the dude at the moment. And I'm sure that there's more for him to do in future seasons. But like as a single season of television, it was just like, why am I spending so much time on this guy? It's just like, it doesn't feel like a season. It feels like half of a season to me, which is one of the issues. But like all of this is fine as long as I'm invested in the story it's trying to tell, and I'm just not. I'm just like, the thing that almost had me hooked in the beginning of the show was, who is Desmond? What is his motivation? Where does he come from? And they kind of half answered that. And the fact that they didn't even like, they kind of half answered it in a way where I'm like, that's kind of enough for me. I'm not honestly all that interested in the rest of it. Like who operated the machine on his eye? I don't really care at this point.
Yeah, what's annoying to me is that I kept saying that season 1 of the show is doing a thing to set up a thing that was happening in season 2, or sorry, in the third Dune movie, which they kind of do, except they basically only like teased it. They basically didn't actually end up doing it. So we do find out that like Desmond has a thinking machine inside of him, which is a thing we will see in we'll see it in Dune Messiah. There'll be an element of that happening in the next Dune movie, unless he doesn't do it, which he could also decide not to do. But then they didn't actually do the like. What's annoying for me is that knowing what it is, like they answered the mystery to the thing that I didn't know and didn't do, and then the thing that I know that I can't really talk. It's like the other piece of the thing.
Because one of the things when I was excited about this show, I was like speculating. He must be maybe a robot or something, right? Like there has to be thinking machines attached somewhere. Maybe it's with him. And that was one of my theories. They confirmed that theory. He is in fact doing machiney things.
Yeah.
But nothing else. Like that's all right. You just said a thing that I already thought. Like you didn't give me anything beyond that other than like, oh, he's also secretly the son of Tula, which also doesn't mean anything to me. Like who actually cares? Like I didn't know she had a son until that episode. So like why would I be surprised by it? It's like, we're like 50 years beyond Luke, I'm your father. You know what I mean? Like it's not that big of a deal to me.
Yeah, the only thing I didn't love is I thought the execution of like the way that they revealed that at the end of episode 5 was a little bit clumsy. I was like, oh, I guess Tula's the mom, and had really had to go digging to be like, is Tula, Desmond's mom? Which like, yeah, okay, it is. The thing of him being like a Harkonnen and an Atreides was to me a little interesting, although I feel like kind of like, it's so far in the past it doesn't really matter. I feel like it diminishes a little bit of the like, oh, Paul, that's who Paul,
Mhm.
Paul's supposed to be. So like that to me is like or like Paul was being born to then marry a Harkonnen. That was the end. He was supposed to marry Austin Butler. If he was born a girl, he was going to marry Austin Butler's character from Dune 2. I'm kind of getting things a little bit mixed up there, but yeah, it's like yeah, the reveal of like Tula as his mom is but again, it mostly doesn't work. I feel like it works better for me in a version where the story, like our heroes and villains, are a little bit more like clear and concise. In this version, it feels just a little bit messy. I also feel like for a 6 episode season, it ultimately ends up like I kind of watched 5 and 6 pretty like back to back ish, like within a day. By the beginning of episode 5, Desmond is like promoted to become the head of the Bashar. And by the end of it, he's like, like the Emperor's like, I need to kill him. So I feel like the pace of it was a little bit rushed. We were talking about this a little bit on the
The
Tastemakers,
Emperor
Karen.
like
Yeah,
pendulum back and forth.
I
Like
know.
every single episode was wild.
You made a point about where like my point is that I feel like this in retrospect could feel much more like the prologue to a show. I kept saying epilogue, I think, on the Tastemakers, which was probably confusing, but I meant prologue or prelude. It feels very much to me akin to if you took the first 5 episodes of season 1 of House of the Dragon and made it into a 6 episode season. But I would agree with your point. I think you made that like it feels like they've crammed more into that than House of the
House of the
Dragon.
Dragon really took its time building
Right,
characters, spending time in scenes,
right.
and like letting you infer things rather than trying to tell you all of it in as many
Okay,
pieces as possible.
here's where I think my point still stands. I feel like it more or less did serve as a prologue, where this feels like they were trying to start the story, but I think they started the story in basically the wrong place. It's very funny because this show had basically a 10-minute exposition prologue to start the show.
It just
But
doesn't know when to start the show, I think. Yeah.
I agree, because then when I watch the end of the episode, I'm like, oh, the show is about, I think, will be about like disseminating the prophecy into the Fremen. And I'm like, that to me makes so much more sense. And I feel like they felt like they couldn't get to that point without doing all of this stuff that I feel like in retrospect was not the most interesting part of the story. And that's to me where I think in retrospect this will feel very weird. And I've said this, that the pacing of this season I thought was weird as well, in lots of part because of like the way they wanted to do promotion for the show and who they wanted to have in certain episodes. Where if they told season 1 in much more chronological fashion. So 2 good examples of that is the fact that we don't really find out until episode 5 of the show, both that Tula like had a baby and that the Emperor had an affair, and that I feel like I was like, oh, I guess Constantine is a bastard. He's not like the actual daughter,
I
which
also
like,
I had to remember that, but then I was like, I think they did tell us that, but I did have to remember.
so I think they did as well, but it feels like everything. It's like people went and wrote episodes in a room, and nothing
Yeah,
ever came together,
they
and then they
introduced
like
this new
rearranged it.
character that was like,
Yeah,
she's the most important person in his life and will be able to and I was like, I've never heard of her before. And then at least they connected her to the flashback character. I was like, oh, I see, she's that person.
right,
But
right.
like, I don't know. Yeah, it just felt like they were trying to do too many things. I think it was just too many.
Well, I think my issue. I think that okay, there's who's the is it Topher Grace who went and put what did he use Star Wars? Doesn't he like put it in
Edited his own version of Star Wars.
Yes. Okay. If somebody wants to do that with this season of Dune Prophecy, I know that's not worth your time, but if you want to do it, I would be appreciative, because I wonder whether just rearranging everything so it's chronological makes this work just the teeniest bit better. Because one thing it could do, Taran, which is like I think like could be true, because I think like you and I are what I'm feeling like I'm frustrated because I think the content in there is actually close to being pretty good, but they messed it up by like messing around with it. And I think like
Mhm.
my feeling from you is you feeling like even if they did this, I don't think
Well,
it's.
I'm with you. I think part of why I'm so frustrated by the show is that it feels like it should be better. Like the pieces are there, it's just not being told in an interesting way. And like I want it to be told in an interesting way because I want to like it and I want to be interested in it.
Right. So I think that what I feel like the instinct of them to be like, but if we tell it in an interesting way is like making it not interesting, as opposed to if you just go back to basics and are like, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. I
Yeah,
feel like by the end of the season,
basics are basics for a reason. Like it can be very interesting.
I think that that's my feeling because I think like we kind of jumped into like really fine details here, but like essentially what the story is like this story is because of some of the ways in which like the Bene Gesserit are a new foundation, a new order, and built on this very shaky foundation of what essentially could have been a completely different version of the Bene Gesserit, but only happens because Valya knows how to use the voice and convinces both Dorothea and, as we find out in the last episode, every other dissenting voice to kill themselves in order to suppress that version of the Bene Gesserit becoming a reality. Because of that happening, and because of the mistakes that like Valya and Tula have, because they're like regular human beings, almost causes their entire plan of being able to set up the next empress as somebody who would be in line and super supportive of the Bene Gesserit, almost causes that to completely fracture and almost like end before it could ever begin. And to me, I really have to like squint and tilt my head and like, look at it from a different angle to figure out that that's the story that they're trying to tell, because otherwise it seems a little bit jumbled, Taran. But that to me on its own is like that's a pretty interesting story, I think.
I feel like every time you start to say something like, ultimately the story is, I'm like, I perk up. I'm like, please tell me. And then you said that and I was like, I mean, that kind of sounds right, but that's not what I got. Like,
well, isn't that what else? Like, isn't that the?
I don't know. That's the thing.
Isn't it that these two women, like they're it's like the very beginning of the Bene Gesserit, right? Because it's like Raquel founds it. Her own, like Dorothea has one version of the Bene Gesserit that she would like to have. Valya has another idea because they are able to use the voice and be able to basically like end Dorothea and anybody who would potentially. I know, same. But anybody who would potentially follow Dorothea, or and that sect of it gets like completely killed out and dead, then they're able to like move forward. But also because like Tula had a baby and like all this other, like all of that stuff ends up playing into like stuff that like would potentially fracture and ruin the Bene Gesserit on their pursuit of their plan to like establish the Bene Gesserit, to create literally like biological order for thousands of years. That is basically the story they try to tell. They do not tell it very well, I guess is my point here.
What I will say is the message I got while watching the finale was, man, Valya should have been more mean. She should have not supported her sister's pregnancy. Like, she was too chill about it. She should have made sure that baby died.
Well, I mean, to be honest, so one thing that I definitely thought we were getting was like sister civil war, right? I thought for sure we were getting that. And I actually do think though, like I was like, oh, they're not doing that. And as soon as I heard that it got renewed and then I watched the finale, I was like, they still could do that. I think that they still could tell an interesting story.
I think they have to.
We're heading into season 2. Valya is on a determined mission. And this is where I think that if you can pick out somebody in the show who ends up being the most rootable character we will have on the show in terms of getting enough attention and storyline attention that they'll be interesting, it is Tula, I think, because that to me is where you would think that the tension of there's a couple places where tension will come in terms of the conflict that they're setting up in terms of spreading the prophecy is one in the people who are reluctant to let that prophecy spread, but then also whether Tula thinks it's worth doing at what cost. I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Tula is the protagonist of the show. I
would agree with that.
I think that I feel like they're trying to make it seem like she's but she is. Like I think we spend more time with Tula than we do Valya. That's how I feel watching the show. I know that like Valya is propped up to be the protagonist, but I think we're supposed to like Tula more. I think we spend more time with Tula. And I think we're supposed to agree with Tula more, even though she's also kind of bad sometimes, but you're like, oh, but you understand why she's bad, because you understand her character. Like they actually cared about motivating her character, whereas they did not care about motivating the Valya character. So I don't know what that plays into. I don't know what the purpose of that is, but I think that to me is what I got from watching the show, is that she is the protagonist.
Yeah, I think, I mean, honestly, I do think if you only get one season of this show, I think that like this story, and again, like, I was about to say it's fine. I don't mean it's fine as in like we clearly have like major critiques with the show, but in terms of like how Tula and Valya's relationship works, I think it works for me enough. Like the idea that it was going to be sisters civil war was like an idea that I completely had of my own thinking where we were going. And I don't think it was actually necessary for this. I understand why they didn't do it with this story that they're telling. It does feel like it's certainly in there for season 2 and makes complete sense. I think that Emily Watson is probably just slightly more famous, so she gets used for more of the promotional material for the show. But I definitely think that Olivia Williams as Tula is definitely the protagonist of the show, and would be moving forward. I wonder if you see a shift in that in terms of the content next season. And Desmond is alive. See, this is where it's bad too. Desmond's alive at the end of the. He's still alive, or he's dead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
he's alive.
he put Tula in
that's right.
prison.
That's
He
right.
arrested her.
That's right. That's right. So then, he's on the show, coming back. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly, it's weird for me to say because I do feel like vibes wise, and then some of the acting in the scenes I thought is really, really good, Taran. And this is a thing that I think like you and I felt similarly when we watched Rings of Power, where that's a show that actually we both quite liked, but maybe felt was hard to podcast about because we thought that some of the like connective tissue from scene to scene was a little rough. Maybe some of the writing was a little rough sometimes. But like every once in a while, there'd be a really cool scene, and you'd be like, "That's really cool." But that's enough. That's all you can kind of say on a podcast about it, and that's kind of how I feel about Dune. That I think if you listen to this podcast, you would think I hated the show. I actually don't hate the show. I actually think it's like pretty good. That's basically that. But we were talking about another show on the Tastemakers this week, Dexter: Original Sin, which is a show that is, I think, very much in the same line. Where I don't think it's the best show I've ever seen, but it has. There's a level of like it's fun to watch that for me. This is how I'm feeling about Dune.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too, is that like I'm frustrated with the show because it doesn't work for me. I think that there, like I said, the pieces are there. So if it does work for another person, I can completely understand why somebody might really enjoy the show, because they like, for whatever reason, they're able to maybe connect to Valya in a way that I wasn't able to, or maybe they have latched onto a different character, or maybe they're just more like, maybe they're just happy to enjoy the world and chill out like I do with Rings of Power, and just like happily live in Middle Earth or happily live in the Dune verse. Like there are plenty of reasons why I could see people really liking this show. And like I think to some degree it's a failure of me that I'm not able to. But I do also like, for me, it's like, I find fault with the writers in not writing it in a way that is approachable enough for me to be able to, because I think I'm pretty good at finding finding things to like in shows, especially when I have incentive to do so, like a show like Dune, which I really want to like it. So, it's some here, some there.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like I certainly came out of this feeling like this was on my potential to be like, I thought this would be the best show of the year. This is the show I was for sure the most looking forward to. And it's just obviously not that. I do think there's a difference between people who, if you really liked the show, I also wonder whether there was like, would have felt like you liked it for after you talked about it for 45 minutes. Like I honestly just don't. I just don't think that the show worked in that way. As a show that was pretty fun to watch on a Sunday night, I liked it. I think that like this is one of those things where like the further I walked away from it, the more I was thinking about it, the more I was like, oh, I don't know whether that was great, but it's fine because it's fine. And I'm honestly more happy to say that it got renewed than I am like I would not have been surprised for it not to be renewed, but I'm kind of pleasantly surprised it got renewed because I think there is potential here for more. So
what I
yeah.
will say is that How I would have approached this if I didn't know I was going to do a podcast about it at the end of the season is I genuinely would have stopped after episode 3.
Right.
And I heard it was renewed for season 2. I would have waited and seen, are people saying it gets a lot better in season 2? Then I might catch back up. But I genuinely was like, this is how I think this is the most telling thing about how I felt about this show. I binged this show, all 3 episodes, prior to, I had to push recording our podcasts back an hour because I needed to finish watching the 3 episodes. And I procrastinated watching all 3 episodes so much because I just genuinely didn't want to. And
Yeah.
so much so that I had to watch them the morning of when I knew I had to podcast about them, which is kind of like, I've never done that before for these podcasts.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Yeah. So that's we wanted to get back to come. We took at least a week off. I was with Ariel for episode 4, but missed last week's, but then back here for the finale, and that is our Dune coverage. There is going to be recaps of Squid Game. Those will be dropping daily, I believe, in the We Know Scripted TV feed. Mike and I are finishing up. We're finishing up Dune. Owen and I chatting about Star Wars Skeleton Crew in the New York. Not too very long, Taran. There will be new Severance episodes dropping on Apple TV Plus as well. So there should be plenty of recaps happening here on We Know Scripted TV. And you and I will be together for the Tastemakers each week. I'm sure we'll be talking some Severance and Squid Game over on the Tastemakers.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Anything else about Dune? We just gotta wait for Denis to come back and do the movie, right? That's the big. I guess probably the timing on those will be quite close. I would imagine if they're going to start soon, and then Denis will start filming Dune Messiah. So, yeah.
Maybe I'm trying to find like what was my favorite part of this show, but I'm having trouble.
Travis Fimmel got to be on our television screens for 6 weeks.
It was great watching him.
He's back on. Yeah.
I thought Chloe Leah, it looks like was her name, who played Sister Lila. I thought she was very good.
I thought she was very good too. When she's like kind of and that's like a big role because she kind of plays like shy girl, and then has to come out and be like,
She plays like 4 different people.
Yeah, that's tough. That's good. She did well. I agree. All right. Well, I think that is our Dune prophecy takes. Thanks everyone for joining us. Apologies if you thought we were harsh, but I think the show deserves the critiques we got. And again, I like the show. So let us know what you thought of the show as well and what you're expecting for season 2. And we'll be back. We won't be back for more Dune prophecy until it comes back, but we'll be on the Tastemakers and on the We Know Scripted TV feed. So until next time, bye-bye.